Rock and roll. Kia ora, everybody. What's up? It is Robett. Morena. It is Thursday in New Zealand, not Friday. It is Wednesday here in America. Back in month 7 of California quarantine. Living the flippin' dream. Today on the episode is episode 262, and we have the wonderful, amazing, good-souled brain weapon, amazing, good friend, and good brain. That is Dr. Hinemoa Elder. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou, e te waiti, e te waita, morena koutou.
Are you on Waiheke right now, or are you in the city? What are you doing?
I'm on Waiheke, which is wonderful. I get to work remotely 1 day a week, which is a wonderful blessing. So I'm working remotely today, and I'll be seeing patients and their whānau via Zoom shortly after this.
It's been quite interesting, before we go into the whole bunch of other stuff, just the way traditional work has been forced to adapt through technology, and that it's not weaker business for it. You know, as long as the communication is there in many respects, there's still as much power and efficiency, and in some cases, actually more efficiency done through utilizing technology. So it's been, I was talking to someone yesterday, runs a big company, and he was literally going, the time it saved me in my life to have more time with my family has made it so much worthwhile. And I think at the moment, there feels like there's a tension between pre-COVID, how work's supposed to be 9 to 5, to during/post, what is and is acceptable with where physically people have to be able to actually do their job. Very interesting. But you liking it?
It is.
Yeah.
I do, and I've found this, and I've been part of lots of global conversations about this over the last 6 months or so. What we're finding in child and adolescent mental health is that, access to services has been a major barrier for all sorts of reasons. It's a particular barrier for Maori and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and using Zoom and the normalization of Zoom, which is what we use in the DHB services, means that we're seeing people turning up for their appointments because the barriers around transportation are gone. Also, it's a more familiar experience for younger people because this is what they do with their mates all the time. So it takes us into a different, more intimate space that does raise some other questions about how we do this appropriately and safely. So, for example, I see teenagers every day, face-to-face and through technology, and they're taking me into their private spaces in their homes, into their bedrooms. And so you can imagine that that they are, perhaps because it's so normal for them and so familiar, they're not so aware of the fact that they're drawing relative strangers into the privacy of their lives in a way that they hadn't done before when they come into clinics. So the group of us who work in this area globally, child and adolescent psychiatrists, for example, psychologists, other health professionals, we're having to talk a bit more about how we highlight the boundaries around that, the safety issues around that. So it's raising some new issues. It's breaking down barriers, but it's also creating more questions.
Yeah, I was just thinking on that. There was a study done a while ago, and when there was an AI robot that was a doctor, people were giving them way more honest information because they didn't feel it was a person and it wasn't in person. And then I'm wondering with this, there's probably 2 elements to it. If you're taking them into their room, they may not realize it, but you will visually be getting more context to the actual environment that they're in, because when you're in your sterile or controlled space and they enter yours, that's your world and they're a part of it, opposed to, they don't have bedding. That's weird. There's no stuff in the background. It's a total, it probably gives more context. So in a weird way, it probably breaks down more barriers to give you more insights, but then probably brings up a whole bunch of different, challenges to navigate through. But from a doctor's perspective, it's probably better, because if you've got more intel and context, you can see their world a bit better to be able to help them more. So it might be making your job better, easier. Not easier. I don't know.
I think it's giving us much richer data, and it's creating an interface where it's so personal and intimate and there's an opportunity to have, as you say, conversations that when you're face to face with somebody, particularly teenagers, you know, the clinical spaces, as you say, can be kind of homely, but there's still clinics. So teenagers receive information about how to present themselves, what's okay to talk about, what's kind of off limits from their own assessment of the environment and the people in it, the adults in it. Whereas when we go into their space, they have a sense of control, which is actually what we want them to have.
Home court advantage. It's like sport, home court advantage. It's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm loving it. And I love the fact that for me, traveling, you know, from Waiheke Island I've been doing it for 20 years plus, but it is a little bit of a mission. So to have a day where I can be at home and do my job is wonderful.
Good on you. I guess let's get the plug out of the way first, because I actually think it's a good plug and it's very relevant as well. You've done a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I'll show
very
you.
cool. Yeah, you got it. There you go. Maori wisdom for a connected life, lived in harmony and our planet. In a nutshell, why did you write the book? Because what I'm interested to get into is the bridge between where culture and legacy stays consistent for generations, but we live in a moment that feels on transactions, and there's something there which I'm keen to dig into. But yeah, why did you do the book Aroha, Dr. Hinemoa Elder?
Tēnā koe, Ngāti Porou. I wrote this book because it seemed to me there was a moment in time where a whole lot of key threads were weaving together. One of those was around my mum. So we talk about legacy. My mother died almost 30 years ago from breast cancer. And at that point, I was pregnant with my son. I really felt this enormous push to step up a generation. And then my mother left all sorts of clues after her death, which I talk about in different parts of the book. She took me to the medical school because she gifted her body there, which is a very unusual thing for Maori people to do, as you well know, and some of the listeners may not be so aware, but this is something that, generally speaking, giving body parts or giving our bodies when we've passed away is not culturally done. But we honoured her wish. And so there was that key experience for me in the wider whānau. And as I've gone on in medicine and become a psychiatrist, I've been fascinated by generally speaking, up until quite recently, the cultural silence, the disconnect between the huge number of Maori people who present with serious mental illness and the lack of cultural resources that are available to our people in distress, and also the awareness that there's a lot of healing that can come from these cultural resources. And the other part of the puzzle for me has been the environment. So as we live more and more disconnected lives from the environment, from the ocean, from the land, from the bush, from the ngahere, the forest, in cities where our lives are so busy that we don't privilege that time in nature, this is also impacting on our mental health. And the thing that kind of drew all of those strands together for me were what we call whakatauki or whakatauaki, Maori proverbial sayings. So long story short, I'd had this awareness that these proverbial sayings were really powerful portals into this massive wellspring of material. And with this incredible, loving, compassionate, fierce energy that we call in our culture aroha. Something that people are seeking, but often struggle to discover and find within ourselves. So for me, it was a way to, it was a relatively easy access way to bring forward this cultural wisdom and reflect on it. So I strangely enough, how it came about practically was the UK, one of the UK publishers of Penguin Random House, found me on a New Zealand website about 100 Maori leaders. So she messaged me on Instagram and we talked on Instagram, and she said, I'd like you to write a book. So I said, okay, sure. I felt a bit young to write a memoir. And so I thought, well, I'd been writing these newspaper columns on a Sunday and including these proverbs. So I said, how about I write a book of a year's worth of proverbs, one for every week, being a little ambitious and thinking, I want to challenge myself. 52 proverbs, 52 whakatauki or whakatauaki. The difference is whakatauaki, we know the person who coined that phrase. And write some reflections about how these sayings have affected my life, how they've helped me in tough times. And she said, great, do it, write 5, send me the document and I'll take it to the team, and the rest is history.
So cool. When I was 30, I did an article on LinkedIn on my 30th birthday, and it was 30 lessons I learned at 30 years old, and it was a timestamp of like things that I'd learned. But with this, I just wrote down here, it's like it's timeless relevance, because then through culture it's relevant. It's to the generational piece. But what many people also not know is my mother gave me this book, and in this book, I won't show you in it, but literally from end to end, it's pretty much the same thing with a whole bunch of different sayings and everything that she's collected. And first one here, the first part of dealing with any problem is the ability to define it correctly. And it's just like life lessons and learnings, but just like the entire thing of just handling. Wow. So I carry this with me. Yeah, it's and so when because I knew you're doing the book, and then I saw it and I was looking through, I was like, I love the format of like gems, but have such a long tail of relevance and especially mixing the culture side. And I have a favorite, because I got an early, I don't know if it was an advanced copy, but I got a sneak peek. It was number 5. It was Ihukuri e tangata haere. As the dog follows a scent, a traveler relies on the hospitality of others. And then you try to translate it when it's like, beware blindly following your nose, be deliberate, make good choices. And for me, you went like, so there's that translated down, and then in my head, then it was like sniper not shotgun, chess not checkers. And that one really, really stuck out to me, because I love playing chess. I love chess. And when I talk about long game, short game, it's been like very deliberate and calculated with that, opposed to, I guess when I was younger, you go shotgun, you try and go after it, and you're the dog following the scent, and you're just going around instead of the hospitality or the strategy of partnering with others. And so I loved your interpretation of where that came from and yours, but then when it crossed over into my world, it still had relevance, but in a different sort of way. So I just like to give you props on number 5. That one really spoke to me there. It's cool. What's it like to, obviously you're going to have to do a memoir as well at some stage. When you look at, actually we had John Tamahiri on last week, and I was saying, Maori storytelling is generational, and it becomes, years, and obviously the Maori Party's only been around since 2004, so under 20 years. What do you think the story has been so far? So, but then when you think of your own journey, you've had a pretty eclectically random, diverse world of media and culture and people and community and all sorts of craziness. How would you define your own story to this point if you were, if you were the future looking back at the past?
I think my life's been, in a nutshell, probably best defined by fearless learning. I have this innate curiosity and lack of fear around learning things, an openness to that. And, that's taken me into some, when I look back, I think, wow, that was kind of brave. That was, where was the frontal lobe there? But anyway, yeah, I think learning has been a massive driver in my life since a very, very young age.
Is it learning or exploring? Because
definitely both, all of those things. Yeah, we can use
explore then learn.
Well, the other part of learning in Te Reo Māori is the word for learn and teach are the same. So I also see that interface of see one, do one, teach one is one of the kōrero from medicine, is that we are shifting our roles from learning to sharing and teaching and passing on. So there is that sense of fluidity of sharing and exploring together. That collaborative learning is definitely my style. I like to go on a journey with others around that, trying things out. But that sense of fearlessness and courage around trying things out.
Well, I think as well, when you sit on the psychiatrist side, when it's on the brain, it is, it's mega chess versus chess. But a big part of it as well, do you get energized by being able to mentally dissect and really break down how something that's invisible becomes visible for you to understand? Like, you can watch someone in a spot and you can pretty much see how you think they're feeling in their world and their times, with how they're going to react to that, then what they may or may not do, and where their energies and their own internal handbrakes will be. Like, do you like decoding? I know it sounds quite not intrusive to others, but do you love decoding someone's headspace to then almost work out their own puzzle, but on their behalf? Is that like an inquisitive thing for you, or is it more natural to help, and then that's the process that you do to get there?
My sense is my process is not about dissecting and finding the parts.
Okay.
I have an experience of really using my whole being, my wairua, and some of the people listening will know what I mean by that. Maybe some don't. So just as a segue, wairua is our Maori experience of being connected to everything in the universe. Some people translate it as spirituality. So there's our wairua, there's our bodies, our minds, our hearts, our gut. I don't experience breaking things down so much, although that is a part of it. But there's another layer which is very much about the vibe of the experience of the person.
Energy first.
I think so. I'm very aware. I've been very aware for a long time that I try to pick up within the first few seconds of meeting people that I'm going to be working with the style of interaction that might best suit them. So I think I'm quite a different kind of psychiatrist depending on the person's needs, and that can evolve over time. So I'm constantly seeking data about the sort of exquisite nuances of where the person's at, the pauses, the words, the types of words, the tone and manner, the body language. So yes, there is that aspect which is about some of the details, but that doesn't override the broader sense of how those things all fit together. So that is kind of fascinating to consider that with you this morning. Thanks for that.
No, because when there's hard skills, soft skills, IQ, EQ, art versus science, there's the artist and the engineer, and even though some people have the similar type roles, but their approach and process to going after those things is totally different. Like I always come back to sport, like a Phil Jackson's energy of how he coached Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. It was more holistic and feel and vibe and that, and then some of them are more calculated and data and and people don't fit in and out. But then I was just wondering, with a cultural lens on it as well, when it becomes about more of a whole being and it comes down to that energy, how do you, I guess, weave energy with education into a unique formula with a depth for emotion to actually genuinely help someone? It was just more a thing of how, like, I enjoy trying to figure stuff like that out to see how others do, because that's something that I enjoy, or I don't know if it's enjoy, I find like maybe mentally challenges as well for myself. I was just wondering from an educated soul, if that is maybe the way some people are more, and someone are more like, more feeling vibes, and clearly you're more feeling vibes, which is good.
Yeah, I suppose one of the other things that strikes me listening to what you're saying is that there's another old adage from psychiatry which goes, who are you, who am I, who are we together? And so it's about what happens in the relational space between people, that's really an important source of data, rather than privileging these boxes, if you will, of yes, of course, I'm interested in, how people are sleeping and the quality of their sleep and what that means to them, and I'm interested in what they're eating and if there are changes, and so there are many aspects that I'm checking through, but I'm not satisfied with some sort of just the detail. I want the emotional tone around that. So those that reductionist approach, you might say, is necessary but not sufficient. It gives you some of the framework, but actually we're also, because we're not only seeking data, we're seeking to find ways to shift things for people and actually to help people discover that for themselves. So it's all very well if I might have my own view and I might in different ways share that at different points in time, but really I'm there as a servant to the other person or the other people who are coming with, whether they can articulate it right off the bat or not, they're coming with some sort of question. I mean, let's face it, I often joke, I'm the least favorite specialist that anyone wants to see. Nobody wants to see a psychiatrist, and I think that's quite right. I'd love to live in a world where we don't need psychiatrists. Unfortunately, we live in societies which promote mental illness. It's like we live in societies that promote obesity. We live in societies that actually make it very, very hard, virtually impossible for people to be mentally healthy. So unfortunately, that's why you have people like me. And but really, I am the servant of those people that far know and they've got people in the room, whether they come individually or not. There are people there with them, alive and dead, who they bring with them, and they come with some sort of question. Usually when they're seeing me, they're pretty desperate. They've tried everything else in the hope that it won't be a mental illness or it won't be categorized in that arena. And so they've bent over backwards to try to avoid seeing me. And I respect that. So by the time people get to see me, they have some drive to have answers, to have some kind of purposeful interaction with me, and they're usually pretty bloody scared.
Yeah. It's within the doctor space of where you're at, are you seen as an outsider compared to other psychiatrists because you roll different? Are you the outsider of the outsiders? Like, and I ask that because there's an organization called RARE started by a friend of mine, Tara McKenty, who's the creative director at Google, and it's about celebrating and basically championing diversity within the creative sector. And so I was one of the speakers over at in Australia, and I just got up and I was like, if you walk down the street, the creatives are already the 1% that everyone thinks are flipping weirdos. The fact that this needs to exist means you're the 1% of the 1%. You're the outsider of the outsider. And then I was wondering, within your world and your space, I can almost guarantee it. I don't think there are 1,000 other crew rolling like Hinemoa in the world of psychiatry. So are you your own outsider within the world of outsiders? Are you the 1% of the 1%?
Sadly, I think I might be, and I'm reluctant to say that, and I'm just processing that as on the fly. I mean, I'm the only Maori child and adolescent psychiatrist who's out there speaking te reo, upholding our values, pretty visible in the Maori world. So there's that sense, and I've just been. I talk in the book a bit about how one of my colleagues said to me once, well, of course, you're outside the tent, he said to me. And I was like, wow, what does that even mean? And initially I was a bit affronted. I was like, oh, what are you saying? Like, we're not colleagues. We're not part of the same journey of trying to help people. But actually, as I reflected on it, I realized I'm glad I'm outside the tent, because being inside the tent that he was alluding to was not a great place to be, frankly. And I've been part of this rather interesting other tent in the last couple of days, which is the what's called the Grand Challenges, which is an interesting title.
You better get a tattoo. It sounds like you get rings. You sound like you get rings.
Look, it's a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation event. It's an invited health conference, and it happened virtually this year, as you can imagine. And its byline is something like, health solutions for those in most need around the world. And I've been part of this and getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning to watch some of the live presentations. And you know what I've noticed, sadly, Robett, is that there's no structural Indigenous participation. There's no Indigenous organisations. I think I'm the only Indigenous person who's part of it. I've looked at the posters. I obviously put in a poster about COVID and Maori and how this is like, we're reliving the Spanish flu, and this is bringing back all sorts of historical things from, colonization, where people took infected blankets to Indigenous places to kill people. So all of that is wrapped up in COVID. And I thought, well, I needed to bring that discussion to the fore. And this sort of cultural silence around Indigenous communities, when we know we have really good evidence that Indigenous peoples around the world are the worst affected, have the lowest mortality rates, have the highest infant mortality rates, have horrible rates of suicide in our young people. And yet I'm in the global tent. I'm at this party, and I'm thinking now, I don't want to be rude, party goers, but there's this sort of elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned, and I want to raise that in a respectful way, but I want to raise that.
It's such a loaded situation, because it's so stuffed, because there's layers of respect for the intent of those within it.
Yes, absolutely.
Versus the potential lack of holistic zoom out mirror to its own self with, is it a true representation of the people that are there to try and help? And so that's interesting. Also, because from a cultural side, I think the one you said there is cultural silence. And this is something that I've put quotes and things about this for quite a few years. And it was around the fact of, say, New Zealand. Rob Campbell brought this up years ago when I first met him. He talked about a unity of what is New Zealand's unity of purpose, right? And that one thing he said to me stuck for flipping ages. I've been just waiting and waiting and waiting. And the closest I could get to think of it was when the All Blacks play Australia in the Bledisloe or the Rugby World Cup, and at 7:35 on a Saturday, the whole nation stops. But at that moment, what do we lead with? Culture. And what do we lead with culture? The haka. But then I went down this rabbit hole of chess thinking. Then I said, okay, well, isn't it hypocritical of a bunch of New Zealanders when they want to proudly use culture and Māoridom at 7:35 on a Saturday, and they like, and they're just like hyped and amped. And then on Monday at midday, they're like, it's bloody Maoris, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no. Culture you can't use temporarily when it's suitable for you to feel good about yourself, but then the rest of the time dismiss them as a liability for community. And there's something really interesting in that, because I'd asked, when Unity of Purpose, I've asked so many people around, and no one's had an answer, and we actually cracked it this year finally with, I think it might have been with Jolie Hodson from CEO of Spark, was saying, the Treaty of Waitangi brought together culture and community, but what has been the point since the Treaty of Waitangi was signed all those years ago, that community, culture and commerce has been aligned on the same page. And it hasn't actually been a moment of unity until COVID. And then because that unified everyone in the exact same boat for all of it. I just then asked back to your point, when if we're aware that culture, we lead with pride, but then there is this cultural silence that exists. But if you think about New Zealand compared to many other nations, like it's becoming cool as shit to embrace te reo now. We've got Maori Language Week. We've got all this sort of momentum rolling. It brings up the last piece, which will lead to the question before the real rant, was if they then realize that the liability is an asset, and then businesses and commerce starts interacting with culture, how do you have a safeguard around making sure that it is not exploitation over empowerment for that culture? So hopefully that thread makes sense, but how does all that sit with the perception versus reality of what you think New Zealand's dealing with culturally when it comes to its own cultural silence?
So lots of questions there. The first thing I think is about leadership. So the way to mitigate and keep a vigilant gaze on the risk of tokenism and exploitation is to have Maori leading and groups of Maori leading at every layer. So you will have come up against this multiple times, and many of the people watching will have too, is, you can have one Maori leader in a governance group, in a leadership team. That's not going to fly, because that person and their ability to influence and create traction is very limited in that way. So it is about the people in groups in those positions, and then it's about how they are able to, or how those organizations are then able to embed structurally the ways of working, the culture, maybe with a medium-sized C, the culture of that organization that continues to be responsive and sensitive, and provide leadership around what do we do when we come up against situations where there's some perceived benefit but also some perceived risk, and what is our cultural risk analysis around that, and who are the groups that we can rely on to lead that, and how do they lead that discussion? I mean, I had a really interesting little conversation the other day that maybe highlights some of this. So a Pākehā woman who's in training to become a health professional came to me for a little bit of supervision, and her experience was that in one setting where she's in a university, there is one mechanism to try to manage this is that the Maori students have their own group, and the Pākehā, the non-Maori students, have their own group, and yet she, is one of the Pākehā students, is feeling the tension of that, and is worried that she's missing out on some stuff, some goodies from not being included with the Maori group. And it also reminded me of some of the work that I've done in Brain Research New Zealand over the last 5 years, where at the beginning I said we have to have a space where the Maori researchers can get together by ourselves. And the first few years I get these calls, oh, so-and-so wants to come to that wānanga, that meeting. They want to do research with Māori. And I'd say, are they Māori? No. Well, they can't come. But they really want to do research with Māori. Are they Māori? No. Well, then I'm sorry, they can't come to that meeting. So long story short, I'm there with the student. She's sort of bemoaning the fact that she doesn't get the exposure to the stuff that the Māori students are getting. And then she's saying, but in the clinical space, there are, a few people like me who are trying to provide group sharing of things that I think we all need to up our game so that we're all culturally competent to work with Māori whānau in the important work that we do when people are mentally unwell or distressed. And we have a law for that in New Zealand. We have a Health Practitioners Competence Assurance Act. We're all supposed to be culturally competent. It has no teeth, but we'll come to that maybe another time. So I'm just illustrating that non-Māori people have some come up against things where they don't have access, and they struggle with that. And we need leadership. We need Māori groups of Māori in leadership roles to help help our Pākehā colleagues realise that our sole role is not to educate you all the time. We actually do have to have time and space to work with our own people. We are all at different places on the colonised AF spectrum. You know, we have Tamaiti making fantastic T-shirts now that say colonised AF, because we're all colonised to some degree or other. So we need that time and space to work with our own. You know, we experienced it, the power moves, right? There's a big group of Māori all at different stages of our development and of confidence. And what I picked up and what I had lots of little private side conversations about was, hey, I want to build up my reo Māori. I want to reconnect with my whānau. Like, how to become part of that whakapapa again when colonisation continues to do such a brilliant job of breaking down our identities. So, long story short, to try to answer many of your questions there, Hua. Don't know if I did the job.
No. It's good. It just got my head. I was going to bring up. So last year, for those the Power Moves retreats, we got like 80 of kind of weapons in my own personal circle. Wasn't public anything. We went down. And no one knew anyone, but everyone knew me. And it was all my crew from all these different worlds of entrepreneurship and business and CEOs and boards and public and private and young bucks, old bucks. You know, Tony Falconson came, he was like 73 or whatever. And then we've got like Alexia Hilbertau, who's like 18 or 17. So it's a huge range. When 80 strangers walked into that room on day one, did you remember what happened? The Maori crew,
the Maori, we all sat together. But what was interesting is the energy of that one table out of the 6 or 8 tables changed the dynamic of all of it, because culture was close and they felt safe. And then that actually spread out. And then what happened then is all those other barriers came down and the energy shifted. And that's what everyone had said. So to probably recap that whole point is, when I genuinely feel if it's one person in a tent of, it feels more tokenistic, tick the box. There's no banter back. It's like a black sheep in the corner, whatever, right? But when culture empowered closely, the spark, the fire, the flame, the energy that radiates off that is like a magnet to draw everything else, and which actually changes energy. And I watched it happen because I knew that over half the room has never really dealt with Māoridom before or culture, but they could tell it was something that they want to be a part of, which then obviously led to that. And I even said the other day, you know, I genuinely feel being Māori in New Zealand is almost is a superpower. The liability for many is actually a huge asset. When you layer tech in the modern day that we live in, when everything is fragmented and wide and everyone's got the same tech and all the same shit applies, what stands? Storytelling, brand, creativity. And what does Māoridom have? Storytelling. It's got legacy. It's got creativity. And so I think when those that are starting to see it now, like the work that Andrew Baker and Hinemoa Johnson did with Air New Zealand, there's certain people who are leading the charge. It's making everyone else take note, be like, wait a second, this shit's actually pretty cool. Oh, wait a second, blah, blah, blah. And it just sort of leads to that next point, which is where you got to start being careful, because then when corporates and globally traded, publicly listed companies start seeing value in culture, and if they start controlling some of those messaging, it's actually a danger to those cultures around the world, which can actually be pretty dangerous. So I think that is a huge threat to local culture, is global commerce. And it's something that I hope those with the right nous in nationally all around the world who control their culture or who understand the nuances of it, just get empowered to try and do that. Because the last thing, I saw a specific situation where it was looking like a European publicly listed company was exploiting local Māori culture for their profit, direct gain. And I felt so uncomfortable about it, because it just it didn't feel right. So that probably will happen over the next decade, but it's something that I think about. Yeah, look, and I think that raises really good points too around this appropriation and those risks. And I think, look, there's always going to be the risk of that happening, and savvy commercial entities will also realize that if they do that inappropriately, the backlash eventually will be horrible. And so they need and the guardianship role that all of us have, and I suppose I want to grow that sense of leadership and guardianship amongst, my own whānau, around Maori health practitioners, Maori educators, Maori businesses, so that there's a strength and a confidence around educating other people about, well, no, that's not how you do it. And that's actually, in our culture, things can come back at you. There's a kind of Maori karma, if you like. Just want to make sure that my battery doesn't run out here, just to check the technology. Okay.
It has happened multiple times that interviews have died because we've just had mad banter and then it's just dropped off.
Okay.
So don't feel bad.
I think we're back on track now. So I think there are some inbuilt checks and balances that the culture has within itself to protect itself, and as we learn more about that kaitiaki role, that guardian role, and I talk about it quite a lot in the book, because that's, I think, an essential healthy role for human beings is the kaitiakitanga of our planet, the kaitiakitanga, and in this sense, it's about protecting Maori cultural values around how we actually do that, our relationship with the planet. What's good for the planet is also good for us. When we do healing activities with the planet, with our moana, with papatūānuku, we receive health benefits from that as much as papatūānuku and tangaroa, the deities of the planet and of the ocean. So it's a reciprocal benefit. And I think the same is true in commerce, that yes, we've got to be mindful of risks, and appropriation is real. And actually, despite our best efforts, there's probably always going to be somebody who will try it on. And we continue to support the vast bulk of people who understand, you don't mess with this stuff. Yeah. You don't mess with Maori culture. You don't mess with stealing Maori cultural taonga. These are taonga. These are treasures. They have survived from time immemorial because they're powerful. They have their own mauri. They have their own energy and essence. So at the same time we talk about risk, let's also talk about the robust quality of Maori culture. It's not some sort of delicate little flower. It's not some sort of flimsy little thing that can be washed away or broken down. Look at the resilience of our culture. Let's also focus on that. And I think that's also something that particularly Maori businesses are tapping into.
It's a great little segue, because I got asked by a student ages ago, is it hard being a Maori entrepreneur? It's like, entrepreneurs, 95% of them fail. And then within Maoridom, like in the money world, I think it was like only 2% of dollars go into Maori, or even potentially less. So I was saying, you're kind of the 1% of the 1%. And when you're young, on the come up as well, because there's all these other sort of pressures. Now, what I find a little bit, what has been tough for me personally, is, we're probably in a bit of a generational mini gap, but on the come up, I never really felt through culture I had the right to say things in a cultural environment, because I was the young buck. Shut your face, know your role, and 100% out of respect, you're not going to say shit. Like there's a text channel on that one of Barry Suter's T3W thing with like all these just Māori hitters and stuff. I've been on there for like 2 years. I've maybe put 3 replies in 2 years or something, because it's just like, it's not my place type scenario. Oh shit, have I lost you? You there? Oh no, have we lost you? Hinemoa, don't go. Oh wait, shit. Team, we might have lost her. Come back. I'll see if she's back up. Oh, something's happened. All right, hold up, team. See if she jumps back in.
Right.
Oh, there you are.
I'm still here. Hello.
Yes. Is that Waiheke internet? What's going on? Are you there? Oh, if Waiheke internet's just cut down on us, I'm going to be so dark.
I don't know what happened there. Oh, I see.
I think you're back.
I'm here.
Okay. Your video frozen for a whole bunch. No, I think, but you're back.
I'm in the show. Everyone can see and hear me, it says.
Got it. I'm waving. I can see you. Oh. I try and jump back in. Oh, geez. We lost her? Sorry, team. Hopefully she can jump back in. I'll text her. Oh, she's back. All right. We're back.
It told me it was not my fault, which was a lovely.
Oh, that's good. I think we've got a tech fail. What is happening?
Whatever we're using here. Oh, Christ, come back, internet.
I think I wonder if it's just literally the software stuffing up.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, no, you disappeared. Shit. Awesome. Okay, get this out. Sorry, team. I'm not sure what's going on. If you can hear me, just comment and say, yep, can hear you. I've just got a bit of a gong show happening. Sorry, team. Hopefully she'll jump back in. We can get back into the mix because this banter is going bloody great, and I've really been enjoying it. So hopefully we don't use it. Here we go. Devices not connected. Oh, it is her fault. It's coming up. Your guests will need to connect their mic cam before you can add them to the stream. Hinemoa, click accept mic and camera. I wonder if she's doing it off her phone, and then we'll be able to jump back in. So now I'm getting a notification. This is one of the fails with technology sometimes. I'll click this up, see if she's in there. It's hopefully loading. Waiheke, are you there?
Trying.
Yes.
Can you see me now? Okay.
I can see you now.
Cool. Should we try again?
We're there. So I'm going to blame. Well, I got a notification saying there was some tech stuff. So who knows? Oh no, you're gone again. Do you want to try jumping off your phone? Oh, damn it. Sorry, team.
Yes.
Yeah? I think.
Oh, I'm not doing anything to us. Sure.
Oh, sorry, team. How can I get her in? Okay, I'll message her this. Yes.
Hello.
From my yes. Well, I don't know. Look, it's I'll delete the 5 minutes of it. It's fine. Sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, we've had a couple of through lockdown. We had a couple of big fails with internet before with some of the shows. So don't stress. It wasn't as bad as any of those.
Okay. So where were we? We
were going deep. Oh, we were going deep. We were talking about potential. Actually, that's what I was saying. When I was younger, I was feeling tension about not being able to speak up as a young buck within culture. And then I was saying that within Māoridom, it's always been a lot of lots of hui after hui after hui, and then they would always have a joke around all hui, no dewey type scenario. And so what I was trying to get to was, if you were to rejig how potentially the world works
What you were
within
trying to get to
Māoridom.
was.
Oh, you back? Sorry.
Yep. You were trying to get to something about all hui no dewey.
Yes, all hui no dewey. How do you reset the energy of culture within New Zealand to more empower collectiveness for action instead of just talk for talk? Because all hui no dewey was a constant thing that would get brought up by others, joking about when Māori get together, ... But it doesn't feel like 2020 is a year where you can just no longer sit around and have a bunch of hui no dewey. How do you change that where it becomes about more action and empowerment and collectiveness of all of it, instead of many times when people feel it's just another hui, just a yarn?
Okay. So I have a big problem with this idea of all hui no dewey, because I have never
Go for it.
observed that. I have never observed that to be a reality. I think that's racist kōrero about trying to define what happens for Māori and Māori processes. My experience over definitely the last 20 years, is that there's been a hell of a lot of dewey on very little resource. And actually, the problem is not the lack of dewey. The problem is that we're expected to do things with very little money and to have extraordinary outcomes, despite there being few of us, very few Māori doctors, very few Māori specialists, just to take that tiny area. When you look at you follow the money. If you follow the money that's put into Māori health innovation, Māori business innovation, as you've already alluded to, we get the crumbs off the table. And so my experience is actually completely the opposite of this mythology, which is that Māori are all hui no dewey. In fact, we do have hui, we do have wānanga. We're often expected to jump at the last minute when various government departments and ministries say,
invite for this. Yep.
We want to have a committee, we want to have a meeting with some key Māori players about, let's say, suicide prevention, about infant mental health, about maternal mental health, about youth justice, about cannabis, and we need to have the meeting next week. Can you just drop everything that you do that you get paid for? Oh, and by the way, you won't be paid for this. So, I want to try to be involved in those things. For example, I was invited, and I was very flattered, to be honest, to be invited to be on the Prime Minister's Science Advisors Cannabis panel. And it was unpaid. There was, they would reimburse travel expenses. It was in Auckland. And so I was able to go to some of those meetings and participate in the many, many emails and the reviewing of various reports, which took a lot of time. And I did that. And this is I just give this illustration to show that this is what we're all doing. That's one part of the doing. I'm also out in the community trying to encourage young people to think about science careers, to think about health careers. And I'll give you another sort of segue into this.
That's good.
This rubbish about all hui no dewey. So one of the key measures of how people get promoted, how people get paid more money, how people get more influence in many institutions. My experiences around health institutions like DHBs and universities is your CV. And people in business are also well aware that the CV has a lot of power. So one of the things that I've interrogated and I've written about publicly is that the CV is not some sort of benign, neutral measure. There are certain types of CVs that we know are more likely to create leverage for people to get promoted and get paid more money, etc. And so for Maori researchers, clinicians, people working to try to transform and create potential opportunities, create growth and better lives for our own communities. We spend a lot of time and energy doing stuff actually in the community, hands-on with our own people. It's very hard to capture that in a traditional CV. And I've argued about this with, very influential, usually older white men in positions of extreme power in these organizations. And, they don't necessarily get it in the first or the second or the third conversation. It takes a lot of persuasion and perseverance, shall we say, and diplomacy to actually get some of these people in positions of power to realize that when they and I've had people say to me, well, about another Maori woman's CV who I'm and many others are saying this woman needs to be promoted. And these men have said to me, well, it's not the CV of a principal investigator, is it? To which I've replied, no, it's not. It's the CV of a woman who has published in peer-reviewed journals. She's also a leader in her community, and her research which is translational about implementing findings in the community, which is the holy grail of research. The stuff that she's been doing actively in the community is very difficult to capture. And I've also said, maybe we should start requiring some of our non-Māori colleagues to show on their CVs what their te tiriti activities have been and how they are demonstrating cultural competency to work in Aotearoa New Zealand. So I refute the idea of all collegiality. I think that has been promulgated as a racist myth about what goes on in the Māori community.
Shit, that was some fire. I like that. Okay, so I'll rejig a question. What would the biggest opportunity for a collective of Māori to get more influence for its own culture be for New Zealand the next year? Because I was on a phone call the other day with a friend of ours from the retreat talking about, when all the pieces are in place, it's easy to make a move. You know, when we know all the players, when you know the game, you know the players. When everything's set up, you can finally then make a move. If you were to make a move for Māoridom right now, that's a ninja move to help culture potentially generationally, what would that be?
That is a very good question.
I've been studying that one. I've been working.
I think there's a few different approaches. There's no one ninja move. It's probably my first thought. There are multiple ninja moves that would need to be occurring and are occurring now. So one is about the power of local. I think that.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so there's enormous power in local Māori because just to contextualize what I'm about to say, we use the word Māori and there's a convention and there's some utility and value in using the word Māori. In actual fact, the hapu, the sub-tribe, is the political powerhouse of the iwi, of the tribe, and so many of us actually relate very strongly to our particular area of origin, as well as to this construct that we have of Māoridom. So I have experienced firsthand that when I go home to where I'm from, and we're working to create a sense of pride and identity and brand, if you will, in Muri Whenua, in the far north, in Opori, in Ngāti Kuri, and Te Rarawa, and Ngāi Takoto, because that is still an evolving journey for many people who live at home. So I think one of the ninja moves is around, I think we could actually probably waste a lot of time and energy trying to convince people that our culture is of value. I think we need to operate from a position of our culture is of value. Our culture is of legacy, intergenerational value. This has already been well established. There is proof of concept of that. let's unashamedly operate from that perspective, from our own iwi origins, from our own hapu origins. So in Opodi, for example, we are, I'm a recent member of a couple of commercial boards, and we are really looking to maximize our own economic well-being, sustainability, the unique facets that we have in terms of our relationship with our environment, which goes back, to time immemorial. And what are the things that make us feel good as a people in our way of speaking our language and our stories? This is the ninja move. I mean, I've been reflecting quite a bit in the last few days, especially in the context of this Gates Foundation conference, about what is the role globally for me personally. And to be honest, right now, I'm thinking that my energies are much better spent focusing on local things. We have unique things in New Zealand. We've coped with COVID quite differently and effectively. And so let's build on that, and let's build on that from a Maori perspective, because actually we have had a different journey in COVID with, as I touched on earlier, we have had to take care of our own. I know up home there were some mechanisms were put in place to protect kaumātua who were seen as very vulnerable. And frankly, people said, well, we can't rely on the government in these early stages to do much, so we're going to have to do it ourselves. So my sense is that the ninja moves, while they have to come from multiple directions, at the heart is coming back to our language. It's very attractive, our language, our culture, our way of living, our connectivity, our stories. And that it reminds me actually of, there's an old saying from the theatre, make the audience do the work. Really, really great actors, really great performers don't tell people in the audience how to feel or what's happening. They draw you in because what they're doing is so compelling. And I think there's something in there in terms of our ninja thinking around how Māori culture actually is at the heart of our whole country, of the well-being of our whole country. And we've started to do it. We've started to draw people in. We're seeing non-Māori taking up te reo me ona tikanga. We're seeing a real growth in the demand for that. So let's keep drawing people in. Let's make the audience do the work. And let's keep reminding people about te tiriti and partnership and what is real partnership, because we will carry on doing what we do. We've had to become experts in Pākehā culture, but so far Pākehā people have not had to become experts in our culture, but that time is now.
I think even more on the top of that too, with the wave of the next generation really caring about the planet and shifting how big corporates are thinking about planet, purpose, people, profit, yada, yada, yada. It feels like the commercial world is pulling more towards the physical being of the planet and its lakes and trees and all sorts. And I remember I was at the EHF Edward Himley Fellowship thing that they had a couple of years ago with Joseph, and this weapon dude, Scott, who was one of the founders, I think, of like Coinbase or some $1 trillion tech thing. He had a simple idea. And it was really so genius that I wonder why it hasn't either happened or become a thing. He goes, every business has shareholders. So why don't we just be able to make our mountains and lakes assets, and then we give them shares of dividends? And I was like, what? It's like, well, let's say if Ruapehu's your maunga, and you're like, all right, my dividends for this is 10% of Facebook is owned by Mount Ruapehu, and those dividends are going to go back to make it clean and water and look after it, and actually turn the planet into its own literal dividend payout shareholders for businesses is making asset. And it was just this crazy idea. Then I thought, wait a second, That's really interesting. But it was the point of how do you literally connect the problem with the planet, make the planet a commercial entity, and then people will care about it.
I mean, that's quite a stretch for me. I think that one of the useful parts that I take from that is that we now do have parts of our country that are legal entities. They have the same rights as a person, and so that's actually one of the challenges that I raise in the book. Is if Papatūānuku, if our planet had the same rights as a person, how would we interact with her? That's how we interact now with the Urewera, with Whanganui River. And I think Indigenous cultures around the world have the leadership stories, have the leadership tech, ancient tech. I often talk about tikanga as ancient tech, because these are the keys through which we can reclaim those relationships with the planet that will then drive behavior and drive the positive reinforcement. People change and do things differently because it feels better and they get something from it. They derive pleasure, they derive benefit in some very tangible way. And that's what happens when you facilitate using for us Maori tech, Maori tikanga. You use tikanga to help people reconnect with our roles as kaitiaki of the planet and of our oceans. On that note, pretty shortly, I'm unfortunately going to have to go and do my other job.
No worries.
It's been amazing talking to you, robett. Thank you so much.
Okay. Always good banter. I'll be back soon. We'll get to hang.
Yeah. That'd be lovely to have you back in Aotearoa, and love to the whānau.
Appreciate it. I'm sorry you're 6 minutes late for your other meeting. I didn't expect we'd go over. We'll blame the technology.
Lovely to see
you. Love your work. I'll see you soon. Much love.
Okay, ka kite.
See ya. Bye. Dr. Hinemoa Elder, weapon, psychiatrist, brain researcher, all sorts of amazingness, all wrapped up into one great Kiwi and good friend, Hinemoa Elder. Very cool. I'm stoked that she could join us on the show. And really interesting, different cultural perspectives on different moments of how people are perceiving things, but aligned on the fact that it's an asset liability. There's a moment, and her book Aroha, you can get it, check it out. Super cool. I'm about halfway through it now, and there's a whole bunch of goodness in there. Hope you've enjoyed the interview we had with Hinemoa. Enjoy the rest of the day, team. I'll see you soon.